All right, so imagine this. You're rushing, right? Big meeting, maybe the biggest presentation of your career.
Yeah.
Suddenly, someone collapses on the sidewalk
Mhm.
right in front of you, needs help.
Oh, wow.
But you've got maybe 10 minutes to get across town before career over, basically.
Yeah.
Talk about a dilemma.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. How three different schools of thought, materialism, spiritualism, and Rudolf Steiner's ethical individualism would approach this moral quandary.
Yeah, it's something I think, most people have some experience with, at least on some level, right?
Right.
That tension between what we feel like we should do and what, our schedule or very real world obligations kind of allow for.
It's real.
Yeah.
So let's start with the materialist. They're not necessarily going to just step over the person,
Right.
but they would likely be laser focused on the practicalities of the situation.
Right. Absolutely. A materialist might be thinking, okay, well, can I actually provide meaningful help here? Like, should I call 911? Do I even have the time for that? It's about this very pragmatic, like, cost-benefit analysis. But here's the thing. This doesn't necessarily make them cold-hearted,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because materialism is really about valuing what is demonstrably real, the tangible. So their actions are going to prioritize those very concrete factors.
It's almost like they're trying to solve an equation for the least amount of harm in that moment,
Yeah.
given the circumstances.
And that's interesting how, depending on your view, that could be seen as either compassionate or coldly logical.
Exactly. And I think it challenges us to think about what even is compassion, right?
Right.
Like, what does that actually look like? Now, a spiritualist, on the other hand, might approach this whole thing with a very, very different framework.
Totally different framework. Because now we're talking about someone who's thinking about the bigger picture,
Yeah.
not just the immediate situation, but about their place in a moral universe. Exactly. Exactly. They might think about their own specific religious teachings, right? So like in Christianity, for example, the parable of the Good Samaritan is a pretty, clear directive
Right.
to help those in need. But even looking at it from, across different faiths, different denominations, there's this common idea that actions have a greater weight, this like almost cosmic significance.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how that very situation could almost be seen as a test of faith.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to act when no one's watching, except maybe a higher power?
And that's where that eternal perspective comes in.
Exactly.
Where the stakes feel so much higher than just, like missing one meeting.
Absolutely. So, okay, so we've got, on the one hand, practical calculation. On the other hand, you've got eternal consequences. Where does Rudolf Steiner's ethical individualism fit into all of this?
Right.
Because this one always feels a little more choose your own adventure.
It really does. It really does. And I think, that's because, with ethical individualism, you're kind of throwing out the rule book.
Right.
Right. It's not about these preset moral codes. It's not about these predetermined consequences. It's about tapping into this like pure reason and intuition that is uniquely tailored to this specific situation.
Okay, so like, what would that even look like in our collapsed stranger scenario?
So imagine like a jazz musician
Okay.
improvising a solo based on a melody. That's kind of how an ethical individualist approaches morality in a way.
Interesting.
So they might be assessing very specific factors in this instance: the severity of the distress, the age of the person who's collapsed, their own skills, their own resources in that particular moment. And then they're going to act on what they reason to be the most ethical choice. And again, not based on a rule book, not based on what am I supposed to do, but based on what is the best course of action in this moment.
Which could be anything from helping the person directly to calling for help to making sure somebody else is helping.
Exactly.
There's no single right answer. It's about that active engagement.
It's that decision-making process, right? Yeah. That active, I am going to engage with this moment, rather than just saying, well, the rule book says X, Y, or Z. And that's another key difference from those other two approaches.
Yes.
It's not about those predetermined rules. It's not about consequences. It's this uniquely tailored response based on reason and intuition combined.
So just to recap, we have the materialist carefully weighing the tangible impact.
Yeah.
You have the spiritualist guided by a larger moral code, and then you have the ethical individualist really improvising, in a way, the most ethical response in that moment.
Right.
Three very, very different lenses to view the same dilemma.
It really makes you think, right? Like when you're actually faced with a situation like this, which one of these approaches feels, I don't know, most aligned with your instincts?
Right.
And how would you navigate that choice, like in the heat of the moment, knowing what we've just discussed?
Yeah. Tough stuff.
It is.
A lot to think about.